All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to do something a little different. We're actually going to step into the world of ancient legal scholars to solve a logical puzzle that's, get this, over 1,500 years old. So what's the big mystery? It all boils down to this. How can a sacrifice be both valid and invalid at the exact same time? This comes from a ruling by a Talmudic sage, Lakish, and on the surface it just seems like a total contradiction. It makes no sense. So let's untangle this, piece by piece.
Okay, so before we can even begin to crack this case, we need to understand the key piece of evidence, and it's all about a very special meal offering called the Omer.
So what is the Omer? You can kind of think of it like a giant switch for the whole agricultural year. It's this meal offering made from the very first barley harvest. And here's the deal. Before this offering is made, nobody is allowed to eat from the new crop. But after it's brought to the temple, boom, the switch is flipped and the new harvest is officially good to go for everyone.
Okay, so here is the puzzle that Lakish drops on us. He says, imagine the Omer offering is prepared with the wrong intention. Someone's head just wasn't in the right place. He says the part that gets burned on the altar, that's still considered valid. But the leftovers, the part the priests are supposed to eat, that's invalid. They can't touch it, not until a whole second correctly prepared Omer is brought. So how? How can one single offering be valid enough for God's altar, but totally invalid for the priests? It seems impossible, right?
Now, to really get why this is such a massive problem, you have to understand a core legal principle they were working with. This idea, which they get from the book of Ezekiel, lays down a fundamental rule. You cannot sacrifice something that's forbidden. Plain and simple. An offering has to come from something that's already permissible.
And that brings us right to the heart of our mystery. I mean, think about it. The Omer offering itself is made from the new crop, which is forbidden, until the Omer offering is brought. It's this crazy circular logic, a paradox. The offering itself seems to break the very rule it's supposed to be following. So, faced with this seemingly impossible puzzle, how did the ancient sages even begin to tackle it? Well, they came up with a pretty clever first theory, and it was presented by a scholar named Rav Ada bar Ahava. Okay, so theory number one is all about timing. It's built on this really fascinating legal loophole. The idea is this. If something is forbidden right now, but it's absolutely guaranteed to become permitted later on, the very same day, you can legally treat it as if it's already permitted. It's kind of like, pre-ordering a game. You don't have it in your hands yet, but you have a guaranteed claim to it, so it's as good as yours. So here's how that logic plays out, step by step. First, the flawed Omer is brought, even though the grain is technically forbidden. But, and this is the key, we know a second correct Omer will be brought later today to permit the priest's portion. So, the theory argues we can basically borrow that future permission and apply it backwards in time, retroactively, to that first offering. It's like a little bit of legal time travel to make it all work out.
But, just like in any good detective story, the other scholars don't just accept the first theory. They immediately start cross-examining it, poking holes in it, trying to see if it really holds up.
The first crack in the theory comes from an old text that compares the laws of bird offerings and meal offerings. Now, this text points out something really unique about bird offerings. They can become permitted through the act of sacrifice itself. So if theory number one were true, you'd think the Omer would be the perfect example of a meal offering that works the same way, right? It starts forbidden, but becomes permitted. But here's the thing. The text doesn't mention the Omer at all, and that silence is deafening. It's a huge red flag that something's not quite right with this theory.
All right, but then comes an even tougher challenge. This one's from a scholar named Rav Sheshet, and he brings up the super complex purification ritual for a person who's been healed from leprosy. This ritual was famous for having an incredibly strict, unchangeable order of operations.
And it's not just tradition. The biblical text itself is really emphatic about the order. That specific wording, this shall be, was understood by the sages to mean you do this exactly as written, in this sequence, no exceptions, no wiggle room. So, for instance, the priest has to apply blood to the person's ear, thumb, and toe, and then, after that, apply oil to the very same spots. The law is crystal clear. If the priest messes up and does the oil before the blood, the whole ritual is invalid. It has to be done over. Now hold on, if theory number one was right, doing it out of order should be fine, shouldn't it? I mean, the blood is going to be applied later today. The fact that it's not fine, well, that's a massive blow to the theory.
So you've got the suspicious silence in that text about meal offerings, and then this powerful counterexample from the leper's ritual. And with that, the scholars reach a consensus. Theory number 1, as elegant as it was, it just doesn't work. It might solve our Omer problem, but it creates all these other problems with more established rules. So, theory 1 is officially disproven. It's time to go back to the drawing board.
Okay, so it's back to square one. But then comes a completely new idea, proposed by a scholar named Rav Papa. And he basically suggests that everyone has been looking at this whole thing the wrong way. They've been focused on the wrong event. He asks, what if it's not the Omer offering that flips the switch and makes the new grain okay to eat? What if the permission just happens automatically? What if it's triggered by something as simple and natural as the sunrise on the morning of the 16th of Nisan?
I mean, this just completely flips the entire sequence of events on its head. First, at dawn, the sun rises. At that exact moment, bam, the new crop becomes permitted for everybody. Then, hours later, the Omer offering is brought to the temple. So what does this mean? It means that by the time the priest brings that first flawed Omer, the grain it's made from is already permitted. The whole paradox just evaporates. It's gone.
Now this theory is brilliant, right? It's so simple. But in Talmudic logic, an elegant idea is not enough. You have to prove it. You need evidence. And amazingly, the scholars find the final decisive piece of proof in a very surprising place.
They find their proof by looking back at another ruling from, guess who? Lakish himself, the very same sage who kicked off this whole puzzle. So, the law says you can't bring other meal offerings from the new grain before the official Omer is brought. But Reish Lakish carves out this one critical exception. If you happen to bring one of those offerings on the 16th of Nisan, even before the Omer, he says that offering is actually valid. Wait a minute. Why on earth would an offering brought too early be valid? How could an offering made from what should be forbidden grain be acceptable, especially when it's brought before the very sacrifice that's supposed to make it permissible? It only makes sense if there's a missing piece to the puzzle. And there's only one logical explanation. The new grain must have already been permitted when that early offering was brought. And what could have possibly permitted it? The sunrise. This is the smoking gun. It confirms the sunrise rule and solves our original puzzle perfectly. That first flawed Omer is valid for the altar because the sun already rose and permitted the grain. But the priests still need a properly performed Omer before they can eat their share, fulfilling their own separate ritual requirement. There's no contradiction at all.
And just like that, the case is closed. A 1,500-year-old logical puzzle, solved. But it leaves us with this really fascinating final thought, doesn't it? Through most of this whole debate, the scholars just assumed the ritual, the sacrifice, was what caused the permission. But the final answer showed that the ritual wasn't the cause at all. It was more like a symbol, a marker for a change that had already happened naturally with the sunrise. And it really makes you wonder, right? In our own lives, how often do we mistake the symbol for the substance? How often do we get so focused on the ritual that we forget the real meaning is actually somewhere else entirely?